Yes, I can see it.
All right, thank you. So quickly before we get started, my name is Dr. Dung Jidong, and I am giving this talk today on beyond the PhD, the Excursus on the postdoctoral funding applications. My background is I studied at the University of East London, where I did a master's degree in clinical and community psychology, and then also got a funding. I got one of the University of East London Excellent PhD studentship, where I studied my PhD and I explored cultural beliefs on mental health among Nigerian population. I completed in 2018, and I've been doing a bit of teaching at the Newham University College London, at the University of East London, and also at Nottingham Trent University. And I'm currently also a research consultant with the Manchester Global Foundation. So I do all sorts of research, and I also involved in numerous grant applications, one of which some of the research that I do at the moment is developing a culturally adapted intervention for African and Caribbean population in diaspora. So that's a brief background about myself. And if you have any questions later, please feel free to ask me more questions about my funded PhD and the kind of work and the research that I'm doing at the moment. For going forward, feel free to follow me on Twitter. Trying to be more active now on Twitter and also share research and other opportunities on Twitter going forward. So feel free if you are on Twitter and you would like to join me. And if you have any questions following up from today's training, please feel free to message me on my email, as you could see on the screen. Right. So just kind of give you an overview of what we want to look at today is basically around fellowship schemes and funding opportunities that are out there, especially for PhD, and perhaps even some of which would be useful for those that have had some kind of experience at the postdoctoral level based on the introduction we've had so far. And we have a kind of a quick overview of what funders actually look out for when they are recruiting or giving out opportunities to fellowship and other kind of funding. And how do we manage to survive the post-PhD years? Obviously, after studying for several years, going into different fields of endeavor, it's challenging, it's daunting. There are opportunities out there, but they're very competitive. They are difficult to hop into your desired position. So look at some of the basic tips that will help us survive those post-PhD levels. And also writing a good grant application or a fellowship application is not easy. So how do you go about it? Some of the nitty-gritty, some essential issues or areas that we should also pay attention whenever we are putting forward an application. And coping with rejection is not a bed of roses going into the funding environment. It's competitive, and sometimes you have to deal with rejections, but how do you go about dealing with rejections? And we'll look at other types of opportunities in the introduction. I think Patrick did mention he wants to even leave the academia. So what are some of the opportunities that are out there aside from working as or within the academia? Right, so there are three main prospects for post-PhD students or graduates, as the case might be. So obviously there are fellowships opportunities there, which is one of the routes that we can delve into. However, these routes also are limited, they are competitive, and it also depends on eligibility and other requirements. Aside from fellowship, another routes or some of other areas that you can dive in, becoming a named research assistant on especially existing project or planned projects where you are hopped in perhaps as a research assistant, and then you will be named in that project. And of course, other opportunities aside from doing a fellowship or being a named research assistant, you could also look out for opportunities in teaching roles. It could be full-time, it could be HPL or other form of a part-time contract in teaching, which is also lucrative, but of course, it's also time-consuming and challenging. Another thing, again, if for those who might be interested in following the teaching route, is perhaps looking out for becoming a member of the Higher Education Academy. So it could be an associate fellow of the Higher Education of the HEA, or a fellow. There are other status as well, which is senior fellow, principal fellow, etc. But perhaps these are most PhD and postdoc candidates are likely to fall within this route. And perhaps you might want to delve into consultancy role like myself with the Manchester Global Foundation or other non-academic organization, non-governmental organization, charity organization. All those are other opportunities that you could delve in, which are perhaps non-academic related. Now, what does fellowship entails? All right. Fellowship obviously involve an application. We've got few members, participants in this training who are already fellows, so they probably would be familiar with this. The application is complete in your name. It also varies in terms of length. It spans between few months to 3 years and even beyond 3 years, depending on the call and the opportunity available. Of course, it's very competitive. There are limited number of offers per annum. Sometimes it varies depending on the challenges, the aims and objective, vision statement of those funders. It's prestigious, of course. Getting funding for fellowship is prestigious. It's a rare opportunity. It's a great opportunity as well. It helps you to boost your academic, mostly publication, strengthening your work or career pathway. So it's involved hard work. It's also known as early career or junior fellowship. These are the common terms that are always used to describe our fellowship. So you might see some of these terms used interchangeably in different calls, as the case might be. The project remit is decided by you, but obviously you are often encouraged to advance beyond the PhD. So some of the fellowship give you opportunity to actually expand on your PhD, the topic you're interested in, you've already been working in. Within the UK, for example, doing a PhD, you full-time usually have between the span of 3 years. And you might be doing a groundbreaking exploratory study, which would then need some more time going forward to expand on that particular topic. So fellowships are often available, especially when you have a kind of a groundbreaking research proposal that you want to expand, something you already started working on. But again, you're always encouraged to see how that can go beyond the current remit of your PhD. So there are examples we're going to be seeing in the coming slide. British Academy, some of you are probably seeing this first time, probably some of you are already aware with the British Academy. It offers a postdoctoral fellowship. It's usually spanned between, up to 3 years. Where you have both your salaries plus research expenses to attend conferences and events, both local and international. Eligibility is always between 3 years of your completion. So if you are particularly interested in doing a fellowship and also want to use the opportunity from the British Academy, you should be able to tap into that while you're still fresh out of your PhD, because these opportunities are likely to expire after 3 years. You must complete your PhD at the time of start. So every year, the terms and conditions usually are flexible. Sometimes they've been changed. So you always need to look out for that. Sometimes you might be told that you could apply while you're wrapping up your PhD, but at the time of commencement of the research, then you would have completed your PhD. So if you have completed, had your viva, minor amendment, have limited maybe 3 months, as the case might be, to complete that, then that can give you a smooth transition into applying for those. So there are historically about 45 awards are usually been given every year. Cannot necessarily tell what percentage that constitute and how many applications go in. So, but then that suggests that it's really competitive, it's fierce, and it's obviously going to involve some hard work and some kind of unique contribution of your research to the discipline. So subjects eligibility within humanities and social science disciplines. Another fellowship option is the Leverhulme Trust, mostly for early career fellowship. So for those of you who have already completed your PhD and perhaps had some other form of postdoctoral experience, you might want to be looking out for the Leverhulme Trust, which is also useful for early career fellows. It's around 3 years salary plus your expenses of even up to 6,000 grand per annum. However, what is slightly unique about the Leverhulme Trust and the British Academy is that here you have 50% funding from Leverhulme, and then you would be needing about 50% funding from your host university or college where you want to base your research. So this could change. They are not always static, but historically, this is usually the case. You must have completed your PhD before becoming eligible. There are about 70 awards from over 1,000 applications every year. So you could imagine the success rate here and how competitive this is. And Leverhulme is also all subjects eligible. The Economic and Social Research Council for future leaders. This is a scheme where it's an annual call and mostly announced sometimes in June every year. And you could do this for the eligibility is that you would have completed your PhD not less than 4 years of postdoctoral experience. So calculating backward from the day you submitted your PhD, although this sort of eligibility and your postdoctoral experiences also varies depending on the course. So those are things you should pay close attention to. You have to be nominated by the host institution. Now, the primary aim of the Economic and Social Research Council is that it wants to enable outstanding early career social scientists to develop skills of becoming world leaders in their field. So going forward, it's kind of a futuristic, giving opportunities and also serve as a platform for encouraging future research leaders in the various disciplines. So they are particularly interested in funding excellent research projects that have potential high impact in numerous aspects. So they have about 70 awards each year. So this is something some of you might be interested in looking at for some of the opportunities that are in there. Welcome Trust is also another opportunity where it gives lots of options for people doing medical health sort of research, social science and humanities. It has a strong preferences for applicants with high prospect of achieving an academic expertise in the different subjects areas. So of course, they are emphasizing on potential for having high impact in your subject area, which is something that actually cuts across different funders. So if you really want to be outstanding in your fellowship application, you have to engage in critical thinking about what kind of research are you putting forward that will have a kind of a groundbreaking or significant impact in that subject discipline. So thinking around that, you might want to emphasize on research that actually have significant impact of shifting or enhancing a paradigm or bringing about a paradigm shift in your discipline or subject area. So you have up to 3 years salary plus your expenses to travel, to attend conferences and other research miscellaneous. You would need a mentor in your host university, of course, who will support you in your application. So historically, there are about 2 application dates each year around August and February. This is another option, Arts and Humanities Research Council Fellowships. This is quite probably more short span compared to the previous ones within or which will cover expenses between 6 to 24 months, around 2 years, designed for capacity building of future leaders. So if you want to start building capacity or engage in some kind of preliminary research activities that will enhance future leaders, this is the kind of call for fellowship. It should result in significant research output, of course. Most fellowship are preliminarily designed to help postdoctoral candidate to actually bring output out of their work, because sometimes you might have comments, like I did mention, an exploratory work in your PhD. So the fellowship actually gives you opportunity to put out some output that would be useful or for public consumption. So output is very essential. At least 2 to 12 years, about 2 years of postdoctoral experience. So within that remit, should not be should be nominated. Of course, again, a mentor from a host institution is very essential. Going forward, we'll talk more about the tips that we can delve in, and some of which is always to stay in touch, establishing research relationship with mentors in your field or people you look at working with in the future. This may require a contract as well beyond the fellowship. So if you've established or if you have a strong established relationship in your host organization, usually they would support you to give you this opportunity even beyond the fellowship. So it's mostly open call. You could usually apply for this any time of the year with mostly no specific deadline. So the opportunities are mostly rolling calls. Right, so that's it about fellowship. Another option which we had top on the list was named research assistant, which is another great opportunity that a postdoctoral candidate can take. It's a great opportunity. You would work with mostly a principal investigator. You work on their project. In this case, you are going to be working with those principal investigators on the subject area, on whatever subject they've got. At this stage, you're not necessarily working on your own PhD, or you're not working on the topic you specialize in or the topic you explored or examine during your PhD, but then you're working on the project of the principal investigator, and then you are a named applicant. So in this case, or during the application, you will be named as a research assistant, and of course, a budget will be made for you on your contribution in the project as a named research assistant. And this could last between 1 to 5 years, depending on the pot of money the principal investigator has put on. And sometimes some of the principal investigator will apply for longer years of research, and then depending on the period to which the project is lasting and what contribution you'll be making on the project. So that obviously varies. And of course, the application would have to fit the funding body and so on and so forth. So success rates actually varies when it comes to named research assistant on a project. So it depends on the eligibility, the expectation, and the quality of the grant application. So there are possible sources for named research assistant, and these are also found in some of the listed or the ones, the funders we've mentioned earlier, like the ESRC, the AHRC, and the Liverhome Trust. There are also Wellcome Trust, lottery-related funds, like the Heritage Lottery Fund, even European Union, and so on and so forth. So these are just kind of a summary and overview of the different funding opportunities that are out there. Now, just to mention around named research assistant, sometimes it probably would require a conscious effort from a postdoc. And that's why it's always good to keep a strong connection with your host organization, with your mentors, because sometimes the mentors would have their research interests, but then they're perhaps not particularly interested in exploring funding opportunities, but you can whisper this to your potential principal investigator or your potential mentor, that this is an opportunity you found out from perhaps ERRC or AHRC, and you want them to put in the grant application with you doing some of the background work in order to be named as a research assistant. So it's something that you as a postdoc can actually initiate, and not necessarily waiting for a PI or a mentor to start up a grant application and then hopping you in as a research assistant. So just kind of a tip for you to take note of it. And all the funding opportunities for both fellowship and named research assistant are not exhaustive. So there are loads and loads of other charity organizations, research funding organizations out there. So as long as you keep your eyes peeled, you're looking out for opportunities out there. I mean, we're living in a technological era where there are lots of opportunities online. So you might be able to explore some of those that are not listed here as well. Right, so we've said quite a bit around fellowship and named researchers and some of the funding organizations available. It's now high time for us to now explore what are some of the things that funders actually looking for. What do they want, right? So there has to be some kind of a synergy, a kind of a potential harmonious working relationship between the person, the project, and the place, or the person, the place, and the project, whichever way you want to look at it. There has to be some kind of a blending in order to be successful in your grant application to become either a fellow or even a named research assistant. Right, so if we're looking at for a person, what kind of person do we look at for? Or what kind of a person does funders look at for? Some of these things are probably not new, things you're already familiar with, but again, this training can be a good platform of a reminder for you to strengthen some of those things you're already doing, because they are very, very vital and essential. Now, first, you need a good track record, okay? What sort of track record are they looking at for? Publications, previous fundings, okay? Now, these are very essential. Some universities, some director of studies of a PhD student, of course, some of you would have this opportunity. You probably will have either one of the extreme or a mix where your director of study would encourage you to publish as you go along, while some director of studies, DOS, would suggest that you complete all your PhD first before bringing publication out of it. So whichever way you find yourself, for you to put yourself in a better place of getting funding for fellowship or research grant, you need to have some track record of publications, all right? Some of you might be aware of doing systematic review for your PhD and then extracting part of it and publish that. Or you might have different sub-studies in your PhD at your first year, second year, and your final year. You can also carve some of those out for publication. So having those handy are always useful and putting you in a better place for the kind of a person that funders always look out for, right? So you must have an outstanding research ideas, okay? So some of the research ideas you've already started with that led you successfully through your PhD might also give an idea or an overview to the potential funders to understand that, look, for you to come up with these kind of ideas, potentially going forward, you are likely going to come up with more innovative research ideas. Or perhaps what research idea you're putting forward for your fellowship would also give that view or understanding of the kind of outstanding research ideas you are likely to develop. Another thing is commitment to the academic career, all right? So most fellowship, most funders, academic career is like a family itself and it wants to be sustained going forward. So funders, we want to see some of those prospects suggesting that you would like to follow a career in research or in the academia. Now, if you can project that in your fellowship application, then that might put you in a better position of becoming successful rather than doing it because you're probably out of employment or for other trivial reasons. You also need to enumerate how the fellowship is actually going to develop you as a person. If you remember, we did mention at the beginning of this training that what are some of the things you would like to gain from this. So similar kind of expectation is also placed on grant application. So you also need to demonstrate some leadership and management skills. Of course, doing a PhD successfully would have required some high level of management, some high level of scholarships and leadership skills. So pulling those together within your application, reflecting on those will also put you in a better place of becoming successful. So talking about the place, there has to be some kind of balance between you as a person, the research you're putting forward to, and the suitability of the research environment. So how suitable is the research environment? How is the research center and the resources available? Do you have state-of-the-art facilities to facilitate your research? What kind of skills and training opportunities do you have at your disposal? If you remember, some of those funders already stipulated that you would need to have a mentor in your host organization, and the mentors will need to write a letter of support or recommendation. So all these also constitute part of the place the funders are looking out for. Then the project itself, how outstanding, how innovative, what is the potential original contribution of your fellowship to the field? So how does your project independently contribute? What is the potential impact? Does it have the capacity to bring about a paradigm shift in your field, whether in terms of subject-wise, in terms of methodology? So those are also very essential in terms of the quality of the project you are putting forward. So significance, rigor, methodology, all those are also essential. Right, so we've said, we've spoken a lot around different funders, some of the things that funders looking out for. It's also essential to think about what are some of the things you could literally do to help you survive through the post-PhD years, all right? It could be really daunting after several years of doing a PhD, and now you're wrapping up and you probably don't know what are your prospects going forward, okay? Now, here are some of few things that I think, again, you are probably doing, but we want to emphasize them for the sake of this training, and perhaps you might want to find some innovative ways of strengthening some of those things you're already doing, and one of which is time and time management, all right? So it's important to actually set aside time to do your job search. And in doing that job search, it's essential too to do it systematically. You find a way, an innovative way of utilizing your time judiciously in accessing those job opportunities out there, especially within postdoc fellowship and perhaps other full-time career path you will be taking. You search for your options well in advance, you check the requirements and eligibility, and you do that consistently as you go along. Right, so another thing is you could utilize more time, okay? More time for you to draft, redraft, and redraft again. Now, if you look at this, there is some emphasis around drafting, getting your application. Funders really get irritated when they see your proposal, your application with avoidable typos, with avoidable grammatical errors, things that all you need to do is to look at them over and over again, and then you can be able to get them right. Do not hesitate to get feedback from your peers. It's also essential. Some universities, especially those that you already have an established relationship with your host institution. Some have access and facilities, member of staff who are dedicated to reviewing grants application going out. So those are some of the opportunities you need to utilize in getting your work. Be organized. Of course, some of you have mentioned you want to learn more on how to reshape your CVs and perhaps your cover letter, as the case might be, what you need to be doing and doing it right so you're not left behind. In this case, you have to have a careful look at your cover letter, correct your CV, your references, okay, you proofread, double check your online application, as the case may be. And in doing that, you do it thoroughly and perhaps over and over again. While you're looking out for those opportunities, in shaping your CV, your cover letter, etc., you might as well think about the possibility of either applying slightly earlier, or you want to build your track record. For example, getting some foundation papers. What we mean by foundation papers here is that what kind of research can you do there to test run the bigger picture of the research you'll be doing going forward. Foundation paper are also going to be potential exploratory papers you are publishing that would establish a grant in that subject area. And when you're putting forward your fellowship application and you are attaching an existing paper that has been written, has been peer reviewed by other academic experts in the field and published in the public domain, might put you in a better chance of becoming successful than when you don't have any of those foundation papers out. All right. So it's good as well to design a career plan, perhaps 5 years, 10 years, or even 15 years. We did mention earlier in terms of person specification that most funders would like to fund someone who have crystallized their prospect of, pursuing a career within the academia. So if you be able to design that and articulate that in different appropriate aspect of your grant application, that is also useful. Be flexible, okay? Surviving the postdoc, the post-PhD years, I think you should be flexible. Probably try to avoid being rigid. Look out for opportunities wherever possible, as long as they somewhat fit to your interests and your desire of a future prospect or a career. Sometimes jobs that or fellowship that might come with the combination of administrative work, some teaching, or including research activity. This also beneficial in terms of skills development, your engagement in public activities, etc. So all these are important activities. For example, you might be given a fellowship position and then also asked to perhaps be doing small amount of time doing marketing for your host organization or for the department. So these are opportunities you can also look out for. They also help to develop soft skills and other transferable skills as well. Stay affiliate. Sometimes you might need library cards, affiliation titles. These are also important. Sometimes you finish your PhD and probably travel to a home country or go abroad, overseas for some other opportunities while you await your await the possibility of a fellowship. Stay in touch with your mentors, your previous PhD supervisors, and other colleagues you've worked with. Very, very useful. And do not also hesitate to ask your host institution for office space. Of course, this might not necessarily be useful in the regime of COVID, where most things are online and we're trying to minimize our presence in the university environment. But hopefully post coronavirus pandemic, you could ask for more office space, local small travel bursaries, conference fees. Most universities, especially in the UK, and based on my experience, departments usually have lots of opportunities, such as a small bursary for PhD students, conference registrations fee, etc. Look out for those, stay engaged, And do not hesitate to ask, actually. Sometimes if you're looking out for an opportunity, you've seen a training elsewhere, you need to register, you could ask your host university if they can fund you. Right. So we've said quite a lot in terms of what you would need to be doing and what you could be doing, etc. But all those actually involve a lot of sacrifice, a lot of time commitment, a lot of energy, a lot of brainstorming, so much, it's involved. And for you to dedicate all those valuable resources, your time, energy, and everything, it's essential to actually ask yourself if this is something you really want to do. Because if you're not necessarily interested in following or pursuing a career within the academia, perhaps some of those energies and sacrifice and time commitment might not be necessary. So it's important to ask yourself, just the way you make commitment to do your PhD, we all know that doing a PhD is very daunting. Doing a PhD, it's a very lonely journey. You're all by yourself majority of the time for the next, for about three years or so. So it's a lot of commitment. So similar commitment should be made at the point of going for a postdoc fellowship. Ask yourself, do you really want to do this? If you've convinced yourself beyond reasonable doubt, you really want to do this, then you could carry on with some of those, or all those commitment and engagement we have talked about. Prior to thinking about or making any significant engagement for fellowship or grants application, as this might be, think about the possibility of informing your supervisors and mentors right in advance, all right? Because you need them now, you need them later, and you need them all the time. So when you inform them right in advance, of course, we know that some principal investigators or supervisors and mentors in the academia, they are very busy, super busy. Sometimes they have numerous projects they are managing, some both local and international. So time is not a luxury, but informing them right in advance will actually help them to plan and begin to commit you in their planning as well. So if you inform them right in advance and then get them to know these are your plans, and that way you'll be doing yourself a favor as well. Now, after going through all the rigorous process of getting, putting in application for fellowship, you might be invited, you might be successful and be invited for an interview. And when you are invited for an interview, it's a great privilege. And because it's a great privilege, you need to prepare very well in advance, okay? We just have seen in some of those funders, there are usually almost 1,000 applications submitted. I end up having between 40 to 70 successful offers. So you could imagine how many grants applications or fellowship applications that have been turned down for you to be given that opportunity to be interviewed. And therefore, you need to prepare and prepare very well in advance. However, if you're not offered an interview, do not hesitate to ask for feedback too. It's always important. One thing you cannot run away from getting grant application is sometimes you would have to face the challenge of rejection, okay? But the good part of it is that most panel would give you some sort of feedback, and some may not give you, but you could email back and say, thank you for your email. I notice I have not been successful or have been unsuccessful. Can I get some feedback? So you might get some of those feedback, and that feedback will then help you going forward in order to put in a more stronger grant application or fellowship application. Right. So some of these are just some kind of reiteration, but they're very essential. They are negligible mostly negligible. They seems to be trivial, but they are very, very important. For example, double checking for funders' terms and condition. Of course, writing a good grant is not an easy task, and those funders really get irritated when, like I did mention earlier, when they begin to see, very trivial and negligible errors all over your work. So they might really be irritated. Things such as font size. Most funders are particular about the font size they use. So looking at the funders' terms and conditions, the font size, what kind of supporting documents do you need to attach with your application? What are some of the attachments you need, and all of those. Pay close attention. And in doing that, you're not only paying close attention, but also double checking vividly if you have actually ticked all the boxes that your the funders have requested for. Remember, this is always very competitive. And because it's competitive, there are situations where the funders have to deal with so many application, strong application, and they have to be weighing, right? So this is an opportunity. Who should we consider first? In that situation, if no matter how beautiful your application is, no matter how convincing your application is, if they are able to identify some few negligible things, such as font size, are not addressed in your application, then they will likely to turn you down. All right. Things like word limit, the page limit, make sure you double check for those vividly. All right. And then eligibility, very important. Time is precious, and therefore you wouldn't want to engage yourself in writing a grant application after several weeks of hard work, late night work, and then realizing at a very, short period that you were not actually eligible for that grant. So double check for those. Could be daunting. Going on to those over and over again, but you need to make a list and ensure that you don't miss out on any of those. Right. So here again, it's also good to make sure that you double check for numerous other issues, including as to whether you might be needing another colleague to have a read at your proposal. Most of the time, when you developing your application for fellowship positions, you should not shy away from working in tandem with your host university principal investigator, or your mentor, or your potential supervisors. Even though you are going to be working on a postdoc project, but of course, you're always going to be working with another senior colleague, a professor in your host organization. All right. Of course, I did mention as well that these professors are always busy. Time is not luxury to them. So if you inform them right in advance, and then you've devised a way of engaging them to look at your work, and perhaps you can design and develop your proposal together. And working in tandem with those professors can put you in a better place to put forward a stronger application. We've mentioned this earlier as well. Most universities usually hire funding development consultants to work in the universities. So these are some of the opportunities you might probably not be aware of, but engaging and asking for information about these services is also very useful. And it's also good to see if you can get someone that can read your proposal from a very non-biased and a very lay perspective, and giving you a honest feedback as to what they understand. Now, the best grant application is not necessarily about the technicality that have been embedded in the application, but is actually much more on how you're able to break those complex field specific, terminologies, etc., or technique into a more lay understanding. All right. And because it's not everyone in the panel is going to be a professional in your field or subject area. And that is why this is very, very essential that you put a very simple to understand grant application when you are putting forward for funding. And the reason for doing this is because some of the panel don't necessarily have the luxury of reading your entire grant application. They might probably skim through while they're discussing in the panel, or sometimes, they read it really quick and very fast. So think about your application and ask yourself, what can somebody actually get from it within 10 minutes? Of course, you might be thinking, you've spent so many days, several weeks, and maybe months trying to develop your proposal. However, you also need to think about simplifying it and also asking yourself, what can somebody actually get on this proposal within 10 minutes? It's important. Right. So this is the big one. Nobody wants to hear about rejection, but it's the reality of life. Okay. Everyone will get rejected at some point. Throughout my interaction with, I've worked with quite a number of professors, and none of them has ever mentioned how they've been successful in every grant application they have submitted. So it means you should be bold enough to face rejection. Sometimes you might feel you've done or put forward the best application ever, but yet you will see the rejection really staring at you. You've got to cope with it, okay? We've mentioned as well earlier, always think about the possibility on building on the feedback you will be getting from the panel, okay? In any case, if the panel didn't get back to you, do not hesitate to email the panel and ask them for a feedback. Of course, it might be a resubmission issue, okay? In the case of resubmission, this also varies among different funders. You need to look at for vivid illustrations of what you need to do in order to resubmit, okay? Now, if you have to do a resubmission, it's actually an opportunity for you to showcase what the panel might have missed within your application. And in doing so, you also need to stay very close to the resubmission guidelines. Very, very important. So look out for the priorities of what the funders want, what you need to do, etc. And you need to also be mindful that one fellowship or grant application is not a one-size-fits-all, all right? If, for example, you receive a rejection of your beautiful research grant application and you feel or want to forward it to another funder, it's almost necessary that you have to double check vividly. You might have the same idea, but you probably will need to tweak and perhaps retweak it in order to meet to specific expectation or to the specific needs of the different funders. It's just like a CV. You've got a CV, and if you need to apply for 3 different jobs, you wouldn't want to use the same CV and send to those 3 different job application. You would have to tailor it and make it more specific to the priorities of those different organizations. Even though it's your own CV meant for one person, but when you submit it to different jobs, you have to diversify to the specific needs of those different jobs. So similar techniques and principles would be applicable to funders as well. Now, the good news is that despite all levels of rejection that might come your way, it is also important to take a note that you are only 100% sure of being unsuccessful when you do not apply for the application at all, or for the fellowship at all. But in as much that you made that concerted effort, even if the chances of success is 1%, 5%, at least there is a chances of being successful. All right. And we did mention earlier, for every call out there, some researchers, some grant application would be successful. So think about it from that light, and then be optimistic and go for it. All right. Okay. And by doing so, you can be rest assured after, perhaps, who knows, you might be outstanding, or you might have an outstanding research idea and then it get funded straight away. Or you might have to try a few more times before you become successful. Right. Another thing, which is probably just a kind gesture, is that when you are putting forward an application, you would have involved numerous other people. You would have been in touch with your mentor, you would have been in touch with your supervisor, with other members of your host organization. You would have been in touch with the head of the department, whom would have probably endorsed or recommend you or your project for postdoc fellowship. Remember to say thank you. It's important. It's a simple human gesture. But for everything you do, some of those are mostly sacrifices that other people have done to support you, even among your peers who you've asked them to have a read through and give you some honest feedback. Someone else you would have asked to read your work from a very lay perspective and give you some feedback. Someone you've asked to only have a look at your application with a fresh pair of eyes to give you an idea. All those people need to be appreciated. And the reason for doing this is that no true success is achieved by one person. We are all connected in one way or the other, and we all need those people around us in order to be successful in whatever we do. So it's good if we might not be able to do anything much, but at least show that appreciation. It could go a long way. Remember, some of those grant applications, you might have to do them over and over again. You might have to try a few more times before you become successful. So you're still going to be needing those people all the time. And aside from that, they would have really made some commitment to see that you become successful. All right. So I think personally, that's very essential. Right. In our introduction, of course, we had one or two people who have also mentioned about how they would want to be looking at for opportunities, even, other than fellowships. And some of those is that you can be also involved in some existing projects. For example, some professors, researchers would have gotten funding from on their own, get large amount of money because they already have history of funding success, or they have got this novel research idea where there is a huge pot of funding already available for them to explore that research area. And at a time where they were having those funding, they didn't know who is going to be working with them on that project. And of course, they would like to work with some young researchers who are fresh, or with fresh ideas from their PhD to hop into. And therefore, that might be advertised. And you might not necessarily be getting information about that on British Academy or Living Home or Economic and Social Research Council or the Arts and Humanities Research Council. So they are always going to be advertised almost separately. So those are other opportunities you can be looking out for. All right, so we're still talking about postdoctoral opportunities, post-PhD opportunities. In this case, you might as well want to explore temporary lectureships, which is also a good idea. It's a good way of actually filing your way within the academia. Lectureship is also useful. It's essential. It's something you might want to explore research ideas there. There are opportunities for hourly paid lecturing. It might not necessarily be from your alma mater after your PhD. You might want to look up some universities or colleges within your reach, within a community of your interest, and you can always ask for opportunities for hourly paid lectureship roles. You could also go for part-time contract for teaching. Those are also opportunities that are mostly available for PhD people completing their PhD, or those that have completed their PhD, etc., or even full-time job. If you look at some of the opportunities on the jobs.ac.uk, which is a website I've also, some of you might be familiar with, most of the jobs opportunities there, lectureships, both part-time, full-time, and even hourly paid, would say eligibility is for those perhaps either with PhD or with PhD near completion. So it means these are opportunities you can also tap in. It's lots of hard work, involve lots of dedication. You'll be dealing with numerous deadlines, which is not very flexible like during your PhD when most of the deadlines are self-scheduled, but here when you're teaching, you have to deal with numerous other things. You have to be going for teaching at a specific time. You have to submit grades, assessment at a specific time. You have to be teaching. So there are lots of deadlines. It's hard work. It's probably ripped you off of most of the flexibility you already have. But of course, it's a brilliant opportunity to explore and also add to your CV. Yep, if it's becoming working in academia or even becoming a lecturer, it's something you think you are interested in. It's something you feel also constitute part of your future prospect. I would also recommend that you look into becoming a member of the Higher Education Academy. You might want to start with the associate fellow or become a fellow, but in doing this, you might need to sign up for postgraduate certificate course in teaching and learning in higher education. So if you complete that, that might give you both the PG certificate as well as the membership to become the fellow of the Higher Education Academy. You don't necessarily have to do that before getting a teaching role, but if you do that and you feel you have the capacity to do it, then that might put you in a better position of becoming or working as a teacher, a lecturer in the university, as the case might be. So it's a great opportunity. Think about it and look out for some of those opportunities as well. We are in the era of internet. The social media is also effective. Aside from all those basic funding bodies we've talked about, there are numerous opportunities online, especially on the Twitter. You could see so many advertisements have been put there. So many opportunities are out there as well. Look out for some of those. Stay connected. Be online if you can, if something you are comfortable with, and you can look out for opportunities there as well. Right, so we have other opportunities even outside the academia. Some of you might feel, fellowship, teaching, lecturing, all of those are not something that really fit into their career prospect. You could also use your PhD amicably in scavenging out for opportunities outside of the academia. And this would include consultancy roles. You're working with perhaps even both government and non-governmental organizations as an advisor, as a consultant. You could work with charity organizations as well. There are charity-based organizations who want to utilize evidence-based information in doing their charity activities and might be needing to work with PhD holders or those professionals who have expertise in specific areas. So these are lots of numerous other opportunities we can tap into, or you can tap into going forward post PhD. Right, so like I did mention, I have quite a few slides. I try as much as possible to see I fly through them real quick so we can open floor for more discussion. And perhaps if you have specific questions or experiences you've had you would like to share with the whole group, that might be very useful. In our introductory session today, we learned quite a few of you have already either doing or would have completed some fellowship. If you want to share some of this experience for the benefit of other members of the group, that would be useful too. If you have any questions regarding my kind of research that I'm doing or what we've covered so far, I'm happy to also answer those questions. But basically what we've done now so far is we've looked up some fellowship and funding opportunities that are out there. And we've seen some key or specific fellowship schemes and what they look out for, the duration of their funding, their expectation, chances of success, and other part of those schemes. We've also looked at what our funders looking at for in terms of the person, in terms of the place where they will be, in terms of the project itself, etc. The kind of qualities that funders are going to look out for, and those qualities that also put you in a better position of being funded for your fellowship or for your grant application. Of course, we've talked about surviving the PhD, what you need to do, how you need to go about this. I did mention as well that some of those you're probably already familiar with them, but we are reiterating them because they are very useful. They are helpful if you are able to articulate them in a more judicious way going forward. Of course, there are lots of opportunities out there. Perhaps some of you didn't know that after several years of studying down to PhD, getting some of the desired job out there are still very competitive. We've seen the chances of success for some of those fellowships is very, very narrow. So it's really daunting. Well, how will you go about that? It's a big question we're asking. So writing a good application, we've said it's not easy. It's something you need to do. It's iterative. You have to do it over and over again. Make sure you're leaving no stone unturned. You explore all avenues possible that will give you chances of being successful. Rejection is inevitable. We are all going to face rejection at some point. But of course, it's only when you don't try at all, then you can be fully assured you're not going to be successful. But in as much that you put in those applications, you're resilient, you're optimistic, and you're doing all it takes within your capacity to make sure you're successful, you are going to be successful. There is always a bright light at the end of the tunnel. So it's not all dark. It's competitive, it's fierce, it's challenging, but of course it's also prestigious and it's surmountable, it's doable, it's possible, all right? We've talked about other opportunities. It's not everyone that wants to become a postdoc fellow. It's not everyone that wants to become a lecturer, or whether part-time, full-time, or HPL. Others would like to work, become a consultant, work for government, non-governmental organizations, charity organizations, and lots of other opportunities. We've talked about all those. And then I would say these are some of the links of the different opportunities we've talked about. Looking out for academic jobs, most of them are on jobs.ac.uk. Very popular as well. Lots of opportunities, especially within UK and Europe, are advertised there. Look out for that. Familiarize yourself with jobs.ac.uk if you're not familiar with it earlier. Set it up in such a way you can get news later. Whenever there is an advertisement within your subject area, you also get a notification. Not only jobs in the UK, it also shows opportunities for postdoc, for other funding, academic jobs, etc. We have the British Academy, Liverpool, ARC, Welcome, Trust is there as well, AHRC. We have findapostdoc.com, research professionals, and UKRI. So all these are valuable links. If you play around them, it might involve numerous hours of surfing the internet to see getting those information, but most of these websites are user-friendly as well. Familiarize yourself with them, and there is always something out there to keep you busy and help you to get keep on trying as well. And I would say thank you for your audience and thank you for your attention as well. I'll let the chair, if there are questions in the chat box, you can bring them forward. And please, for those of you who have had some other experience that I might have not covered in this short talk, please do not hesitate to share with me and share for the benefit of the others. This training, we have 2 hour slot, and of course 2 hours will not be enough for us to go into the real details and nitty-gritty of grant application beyond postdoc fellowship, things such as designing a convincing rationale for your study, research titles, how do you make it more catchy, more convincing, and objectives, aims, and aims of your study. How do you work around those? How do you polish your research ideas and make it more convincing to your potential funders, writing case for support, articulating your methodology and making it more professional, more succinct, more convincing, and also tidying up your entire application. So 2 hours wouldn't have been enough for all those details, but I believe what we've covered so far is probably good enough to give you some kind of preliminary understanding or foundations around fellowship and potential funding going post PhD experiences. So I've deliberately reserved this spare time for us to have a general conversation, and please feel free to share your experiences and give us some feedback as well. Thank you.
Yep. Okay, thank you so much for that, Dr. Dung. That was really, really helpful and insightful. I think we got a comment from, just trying to pull out the text box. Not so techy. Eddie, please could you help with that? I'm trying to assess the question tabs, the chat box.
Yeah, you should. Is there like a chat on the bottom of your screen that you're able to click on? Otherwise, I can read out questions if you'd like.
Please.
Great. From sure. Camille Jacob, I think, yeah.
Sorry, would you like me to read out or?
Oh, that would be great. Thank you.
Okay, sure, yeah. So Camille asks, she says rather, thank you for this presentation. Do you have any recommendations for contacting potential mentors / host institutions? Is it best to only contact people you've already worked with, or is it okay to contact people in institutions you think you would be a good fit for? And finally, should you contact people with a full proposal already?
Good question. Right, so that's actually a good question. These are also things we don't necessarily get information about there easily out there. Building a preliminary contact with a potential mentor or supervisor is something that should be flexible. Now, I will begin by saying it's probably useful to build on an existing relationship rather than begin to nurture a brand new relationship. Now, existing relationship is likely going to be a former director of study, a supervisor in your PhD, or perhaps another colleague or a senior person in the same university where you're doing your PhD, or even your former alma mater, where if perhaps you would have done your undergraduate and master's degree in a different institution. It's essential to keep that valuable relationship. That's one. The relationship is actually going to serve two purposes. First is in helping you to get through the opportunities around fellowship. And secondly, even if you are established, If you've got a PhD, it's very likely you're going to be indoctrinated into the field of doing research. So you might also want to be publishing and be more research active, etc., if it's something you like to do. Now, it's also useful, do not be confined with your existing network. For example, if you're doing a research where you feel there is another expert elsewhere who is doing some remarkable work in that subject area, you can contact them and tell them that, look, this is what you've done in your PhD, and this is where you want to take your PhD going forward, and you want to work in their lab. Most professors call their research team a lab, right? You want to join his or her lab or their lab, and then to hear feedback. Now, I'll tell you what's the challenge there. Remember, I did mention consistently throughout this talk that academics don't have luxury of time at their disposal. So they are always busy, all right? You might drop them an email and they're not gonna get back to you, all right? But then you have to imbibe on that spirit of resilience and consistency in whatever you do, in the sense that you send an email, dear professor, I'm doing this research. I've looked up your profile. I've read a number of papers from your publication, and these are my observations. These are my comments around the papers you've published. This is the work that I'm doing, and here is the common ground between the existing work you're doing and what I'm doing and what I'll be doing in the future. Once you establish that kind of a web of ideas between the professor and yourself, you drop them an email, they probably wouldn't get back to you because they have hundreds of emails coming in every day. You're not able to respond to all of them. And then maybe after 2 weeks, 3 weeks, depending on what's more comfortable for you, you send a reminder email of the same chain of email, all right? And they may not get back to you. But my understanding is that by the time you do that, maybe at the interval of 3 weeks, and you do that for 3 to 4 times, they'll get back to you. Now, they'll get back to you for 2 reasons. First is because you have persisted, and the ideas you're sharing are not only valuable to you as a potential postdoc, but also to the professor because you are advancing their own area of research as well. That is first. And secondly, they would get back to you because you will keep emailing them, because that's the impression. By the time you've done that 3, 4 times, it means you might continue emailing them. And the earlier they get back to you, then the better they reduce your future contact to them. And they would be honest. Most of them, they will be honest and letting you know that they can either work with you or not. But my understanding is that majority of the time, they are likely to work with you. Okay, so you might devise other means of contacting, those professors, but it's not easy. It's not just bread and butter. You have to put in some resilience, and you have to be consistent. And as long as you have, something reasonable, because the relationship is always going to be, mutually beneficial. Once you can present it that way, I'm sure you can get a potential PA. Now, another point I would like to mention as well is that most academic wouldn't want to invite someone into their lab if they don't have confidence in them. And I think another part of the email was if what you should attach to send the professor either a full owner. In my opinion, I don't think it's probably useful at the first instance you email your entire proposal to the professor. I don't think they're going to read it because you have to entice them. For those of you who have probably been in sociology and psychology, you might have heard about the foot in the door strategy, where you start by something more easier for the professor to do. And what are some of those easy things? A short email articulating what the professor is doing, the number of papers you've read from their published work, what you are doing, and where you're going forward. That should be enough for your first email. And perhaps subsequently, or even within that email, you may want to share a summary, a one-page summary of your CV, perhaps the publication you've made, the successes you've gotten from maybe academic prizes, etc. Show them that you've got something that is essential, and there is potential mutual benefits between the both, okay? And some of those you can use your discretion as well. But my understanding is academic life is super busy. And most of the time, academics would like to drop the number of responsibility, not necessarily adding. So you have to present your case in such a way that you are not necessarily going to be adding more work to them, but then you are actually there to facilitate the existing work they are doing in that field. I don't know if that's helpful, but that's what I'm thinking.
Wow. Thank you for that insightful response to a question. So we've got Tila Elizad. Would you want to unmute your mic and ask your question, please? Because I can see your hands up. All right, thank you.
Thank you, Charla. Thank you all for organizing this, and Dr. Jidong for such an interesting talk that covered a lot of ground. That was very challenging. And I think you did really well. Thanks.
Thank you.
So I am an overseas student. I was an overseas student, now an overseas scholar living in Britain. And I was wondering if you could build on which of these opportunities are better for overseas people. Some of them I understand in terms of eligibility might not be even a possibility, but others maybe, you know, the pool of the, like how the cohort usually look like, and maybe they are more prone to having a more diverse group of fellows. So something on that, thank you.
Right, thank you for that good question as well. Of course, thinking from the perspective of an international student, perhaps working in the UK or other part of Europe, but as long as you're an international student, there is the likelihood of feeling having limited opportunities as compared to home students. And that is probably more common with funded PhD, where some of which specifically stipulated that this is perhaps only eligible for home students and probably EU students. Of course, now Brexit has been enacted, which might be different going forward with funding. I wouldn't want to single out a specific funding that is more internationally friendly or more friendly for international students. But my understanding is most of postdoc fellowship opportunities are likely to be open for both home students and international students. Okay. As much that your research ideas are compelling in terms of impact to humanity, impact to the field, impact to the society, you are likely to be successful. However, it's also essential, of course, you did mention as well that some of those eligibility might not be a possibility. Delving into grant application for postdoc, and not necessarily only for international students, but I think for everyone else, is having that optimistic attitudes toward your application. All right. So for example, when I'm putting forward an application, a funding application, I've tried quite a few applications. I wasn't successful, but I think throughout my academic life, I've always gotten funding. Both my undergraduate, master's degree, PhD, all were funded. What I usually do personally is I go into that grant application after looking at all the eligibility requirements. If I'm eligible, I put in all my energy. I don't leave no stone unturned. I make sure that I tick all the boxes from the funders. And if I'm able to do that, gotten support from mentor, peers, colleagues to have a read through, helping me to look out for things that I might have missed out. If I'm able to do all of those and I'm happy at the point of submission, the outcome really necessarily bothers me a lot. And because I know it's either I'm successful or unsuccessful, or probably resubmit. So those are mostly three options that might come up from the grant application. So I go in there with more optimistic attitude or an optimistic mindset, with the feeling as though if 1,000 applications are going to be put forward, they need to nominate 50, for example, I should be among the top 10. That's the kind of mindset. It's not always going to work out that way, but I feel like this is a kind of a coping mechanism, if you want to call it. It's a kind of a mechanism, something I built within myself to help me manage what comes out of my grant application. So in a nutshell, I wouldn't want to think that as an international student, you have limited opportunities. I will be more optimistic, and then as long as I'm eligible, I'll go for it. I don't know if that's helpful.
Yes, that's very helpful. Thank you.
All right, welcome, Pilar.
Yep, thank you for that. Does anyone else have any question that they might want to ask? Can raise your hands and then ask your question, or alternatively, you can type it on the chat box. Anyone?
Please feel free to share your thoughts. If you have had some peculiar experience of postdoc or effort you've made previously that we've not discussed, if it's something you could share for the benefits of other members of the group, that would be helpful too. Please do not hesitate to share.
Hi.
Yes, please.
Dr. Jidong, thank you very much. I really enjoyed it. I guess so far we've been talking about all the formal things we need to do, but I guess my question to you is, how about the informal bit? What other things can we do to cushion success or to even cushion that ovation that we may get from prospective PIs or even funders in general?
Wow, interesting, Patrick. Thank you. Yes, I think that's quite a tricky one. The informal. Right. I wouldn't say there is, probably classifying between formal and informal, but it's quite interesting to really think. I think a colleague of mine often say people talk about their glory, but they don't necessarily tell people what they've gone through, the number of failures, the challenges before actually attaining the success they have been glorified for. Honestly, if you ask for something informal, the informal bit is probably going to be around resilience, honestly, and hard work. Majority of the participants, including you in this talk now, are those who have been involved in doing a PhD. And we all know that doing a PhD, you probably would know from probably year 1, year 2, what you need to do. However, you would know, you then have to do it. So it's mostly has to do with commitment, time investment in whatever you're doing, and being resilient and being dedicated. Somebody would say that being successful is not an attitude, it should be a behavior. Just like a student who is having their results, their academic transcript, where they have E, and then suddenly in 1 or 2 modules they have a distinction, an A or an A+, and then they have E, D, which is mostly like an average. No, it should have some consistency. I don't know if that's making any sense. So what I'm trying to say here is that some of the informal things you could do in order to aid your success is about consistency. And what I did mention to one of the questions that was asked earlier, what you could do to get in touch with those PI or potential mentors. Some of the informal thing you could do, which I did mention earlier as well, is by emailing, if it is someone you've not really known before. And what you could do is to show some engagement and interest in the work they're doing. And for example, if you have foundation papers and you are publishing, you could cite some of those mentors. And when you are emailing them going forward, you could say, oh, your paper on this, I've read it, this is my opinion, and I've also cited on my paper. So that way you're trying to show some kind of resilience and connection with the potential PI. And my understanding as well is that when PI and potential mentors realize that you're coming into their lab, working with them, is going to be more facilitative and not necessarily adding more work to them, then you are likely going to be accepted. And another thing I should mention as well, which I just remember from Patrick's question is the fact that if you have established a good quality relationship with a potential mentor or a supervisor, sometimes the supervisors can use your idea and develop a project, right? And develop a project and then have you on their project. That is one. Another option is you might get a research ideas, and then the supervisor will look for funding for you because they always have information. Some of them have been in the career for several years. Some of them have their colleagues who are the people that have privileged information on all sorts of fundings. All right. And sometimes, again, you know, some of the funding you're seeing out there, other people have already had privileged information. They already have, they are already well equipped. So working closely and working in tandem with those professors is useful. Another thing you could do informally with a potential mentor is look at their profile, see the kind of work they are doing, and then offer to serve a role. For example, you could email the mentor and say, I noticed from your profile page that you are working on a grant, I also understand that this grant span for 4 or 5 years, 2 years, whatever time period. And these are some of the things that might involve. I am less busy and I'm happy to help with systematic reviews on this topic. Is that something you feel I can start up with? Now, offering yourself to do that kind of a role would then make the mentor understand that you are bringing something into the research team. And of course, they are always going to be happy to help you in, except if it is not something useful. And even when you make that offer, the professor may then suggest that, oh, thank you for offering to do this. However, I think doing this and that would be more useful. Right? So that way you are making your way into the research team. And trust me, when you are hopped into the lab, working with those professors, you might not have funding at the moment, but with preliminary volunteering offers you are making to the team, when there is an opportunity coming up, they will be quick to nominate you. Remember, we did mention that some professors have a huge pot of money to do research, but they don't know who is going to be a named research assistant in the project, and they will have to advertise. Now, if you are already been emailing, offering that mindset of services and engagement and so on and so forth, then you are likely going to be nominated. And again, it depends on the offer. I know there are different rules regarding the pay grade and the roles that have to be advertised publicly and those that don't have to be published or advertised. So you might just quietly be hopped in. And even when those roles are still going to advertise out there, but remember, you are already working with those teams and you might have gotten privileged information about those offers. So you are likely going to have an extra edge on that opportunity more than anyone else that will be seeing it for the first time. So Patrick, that's my take on that. I don't know if that answers your question, but if anything comes up before the end of this training, then
it absolutely does. Thank you very much. I appreciate it.
Yeah.
I have a question, if I may.
Yes, please.
Yeah, thank you so much for this presentation. All very useful and so much to take away. My question is about the job applications. Is there, in fact, for PhD students, would you recommend them to start off their, job applications with fellowship applications? Or, in fact, this is what I did. or it's easier to get maybe teaching role or research assistant position in the first place than fellowship positions. But as you said, fellowship applications are very competitive, and as PhD students, we may not be competitive enough to get this kind of positions. But if we look at the eligibility criteria, we tick all the boxes as a final year, PhD candidate. Would you recommend, applying for them now, or would you recommend to, build up track record first, getting published work, etc., then wait for the next round, then apply for them?
Thank you, Busra. You've really asked a good question. But I think either going for teaching jobs application or going for funding fellowship position, it's probably has to do with your own personal specification, your own personal prospect. For example, some people might be more keen to having a teaching position, while other people might be more keen in doing a postdoc fellow. So it all depends. For example, and then you need to also weigh the benefits of different sites. Having a teaching position, if you have a full-time teaching position after your PhD, probably will take you a few years. It depends on how enthusiastic you are regarding research. If you are very enthusiastic and you're able to quickly work with the research group in your university, maybe in 2-3 years, you should be able to apply for big grants and even then bring a postdoc into your research team. Or you want to do, but again, you probably would have to struggle because you are working, you are teaching, you're doing admin stuff, so you might not necessarily have ample of time to be doing research vigorously. Now, for a postdoc fellow, within that period, 2-3 years or more, you're likely going to be working on your project, and then you'll be publishing consistently because most of those funders are specific around the impact you'll be making with your research. So they really expect some output from your work, and those output are mostly around peer-reviewed journals, etc. So within the postdoc period, you might have quite a number of quality papers published. And during the postdoc, you don't necessarily have to worry much about teaching and admin stuff. But if you're starting with teaching, then you have to do all those. You have to weigh to see which one really works for you most. Now, opportunities actually varies. Some of you might have opportunities that comes your way that give you an easy transition into postdoc, while some of you might have opportunities that will come your way that will give you more quick and seamless transition to teaching roles. It's actually up to you what opportunity you have at your disposal and what is more useful for you. However, I did mention earlier as well that you probably need to be flexible in your option. So you might want to be looking at both, which of the opportunities come your way first, using your existing network, and also utilizing any opportunity that comes your way. That would be useful. So I will not be able to say which one is best, but then you need to weigh and see what do you think is more useful for you. Is this something you really want to engage in this kind of competition at this stage, or is it something you want to hold back and then try to establish your research profile before going for it? Also. But then remember that most of these opportunities, especially for postdoc fellow, have an expiry date. Some will say between 3 to 4 years of your PhD, and then you become ineligible to apply for them.
Yeah, okay, thank you.
Yeah, but again, if you have a teaching opportunity, it's something you really want to do, I would definitely suggest you go for it. And you might get a contract, you might get a HPL, but when you get started, then you build your CV on teaching role, a new teaching position might come up, and then you can hop onto it. Some universities negotiate. If you have a teaching position, you might want to negotiate maybe 50% teaching, 50% research. Some universities are even more flexible. They give you 70% teaching, 70% research, 30% teaching, etc., etc. Some employers will negotiate with you. How do you want your job offer, your job role to look like? So it's up to you, Bushra, what you think is more useful and the opportunities you have at your disposal. But I would strongly recommend you keep your eye peeled and see which of those opportunities are much more, available at your disposal.
Okay, I see. Thank you so much.
You're welcome.
Wow, thank you for that. Anyone else have any question that they might want to ask? Okay, from Camille Jacob. If your research, I'll just read that one. 1 second.
Thank you.
If your research involves fieldwork or you are interested in being based outside the UK. Oh, sorry, it's actually a suggestion. That's fine, it's not a question. So it was just suggesting it's less horrifically competitive than the full 3 years fellowship. Yeah, that's a good point. Yep. Anyone else have any question that they might like to ask? Anyone else?
Thank you for that comment. Quite useful.
Yeah, very useful. Okay, okay, that's fine. Okay, I want to thank everyone for attending, and I do hope you found the training really useful. So keep an eye out for other training that will be coming up and other guest speakers that will be invited alongside Dung to deliver trainings. And once again, thank you. So if you have any question, Dung, would you like to flag up the page so that they can contact you for maybe tips and research? Maybe you could help look at their prospective grant application or things like that. That would be great. So it's dung.jidong@mcrglobal.org. So please do feel free to drop me an email. Alternatively, you could also follow him at Dr Jidong, because he do post some research funding opportunities as well, which would be very, very helpful. Once again, thank you all for attending and have a good weekend. Yeah.